They said my great-grandfather's 80-year-old dam was an eyesore and safety hazard, so they bulldozed it while I was at my daughter's wedding. I came home from Autumn's reception to find 80 years of hand-cut limestone blocks reduced to rubble, muddy, water-rushing, wild, and the smell of diesel fumes hanging thick in the evening air. The controlled flow that had protected our neighborhood since 1943, destroyed in 4 hours by a woman who moved higher from California 2 years ago. There stood Cordelia Blackthorne on her pristine deck, sipping what looked like champagne, watching Raw Creek water flood into her own subdivision. The HOA notice taped to me, $12,000 in unpaid infrastructure fees for a dam that existed before her precious neighborhoods, was even a developer's fever dream. Here's what they don't teach you in Hope Residence School. Water always wins. Endium, a retired Army Corps of Engineer, who's about to give it some very What would you do if PETA officials destroyed something your family built with their own hands? Drop a comment with where you're watching from and tell me your worst HOA. My name's Ezekiel Ironwood, Zekato, anyone who's earned the right to skip formalities. Third generation owner off 15 acres that my grandfather Jeremiah curved out of Missouri wilderness. Back when men solved problems with dynamite and determination, instead of lawyers and homeowners associations, Jeremiah built our dam in 1943 with hand-cut limestone blocks and old-school no mortar, just precisely fitted stones that had been holding back seasonal floods for 80 years. Every spring you could hear the gentle trickle of controlled water over those smell the wet limestone mixed with wild mint growing along the banks, and feel the smooth texture of rocks polished by decades of patient water flow. I inherited more than property when Jeremiah passed. I got his stubborn streak and 23 years of Army Corps engineering experience. After 3 tours and a medic, I was perfectly content living in our modest farmhouse, watching me daughter Autumn grow up where bullfrogs sang their evening concerts. Sand afternoon, sunlight filtered through oak branches like nature's own stained glass. Then the developers came. Willowbrook Estates sprouted around using 1995 like mushrooms after rain. Cookie cutter houses for people with rustic charm was something yell boot. At Pottery Barn, our creek became a Thier water feature. Our flood control became their eyes sore. Most neighbors were decent folks, but every subdivision's its queen bee, and ours came with a California driver's license and the social skills of a particular aggressive wasp. Enter Cordelia Blackthorne, former city planning assistant, current HOA president for 3 terms running, future migraine and designer clothing. She drove a white Tesla that never seemed to pick up roadist, maintained a yard so sterile it could double as a surgical suite, and Dad perfected the art of smiling while mentally calculating how much Yorba cord local customs were costing her. The first shot came 2 months after Autumn's engagement. Mr. Ironwood, she said, standing on my porch in jeans that probably cost more than disability check. We need to discuss your property's integration with community standards. Integration like I was defective software that needed updating. Ma'am, my property was here before your community exited, I replied, watching her dismissed hand-carved porch posts with the same shoal she'd used for roadkill. That's precisely the problem. She produced a folder thick enough to stop your rustic infrastructure oppose safety concerns. That dame specially, it's creating liability. And frankly, Mr. Ironwood, some residents find your lifestyle incompatible with my lifestyle. Code for you people. Don't belong here. The smell off her expensive perfume couldn't quite mask the scent of premium, grade and barely concealed contempt. I offered regular inspections, minor maintenance, whatever, would keep CPS. But Cordelia had that predatory look people get when they've disdited the nail, and they're the hammer. Her first unfair act. She called Child Protective Services, claiming my property was unsafe for children because Atsum still visited with her fiancé's kids. Anonymous tip, of course. But the timming was surgical right during wedding. The harassment campaign had begun, and Cordelia had just declared war on 4 generations of my family. But she'd miscalculated one thing about treated military engineers. We don't just build things to last. We build them to survive people exactly like her. 3 weeks after the CPS visit, Wick thankfully ended with the social worker apologizing for the obvious malicious. A certified letter arrived that made Cordelia's previous harassment look like amateur hour. $12,000 in retroactive infrastructure fees for my 80-year-old dam. I read the legal gibberish twice, standing in my gravel driveway while the mail truck's diesel exhaust still hung in the morning air like a toxic cloud of bureaucratic stuff. Rough paper crinkled between my fingers as I processed the sheer audacity. According to HOA consultant Brantley Blackthorne, yes, you caught that last name. My dam was negatively impacting downstream water management systems and required remediation assessment fees. The twisted logic was almost impressive in its audacity. My dam, which had been controlling creek flow since before their subdivision existed, was somehow actively responsible for improvements they'd made to handle runoff from houses that shouldn't have even built on a floodplain in the first place. It was like blaming Thilithos for the rocks. 30 days to pay or face remediation proceedings. Translation. Pay up or we'll destroy your family heritage with the enthusiastic efficiency of a toddler with a sledgehammer. But here's where Cordelia made her first big mistake. I'm not just a retired engineer. I'm a paranoid retired engineer who believes in documentation. A quick Google search in Mr. Brantley Blackthorne revealed something my old Army Corps buddies had reeled into me. Always check professional credentials. Turns out, this expert was licensed in Texas, but practicing hydrologic synced in Missouri, without proper state credentials. Back in my Corps days, we'd seen contractors try this shell game constantly. Operate just outside their jurisdiction to avoid oversight and accountability. My sergeant used to say, always verify the license before you trust the expertise. Unpaid Advice had just saved me 12 grand, and handed me a legal sledgehammer of me. My counterpunch was swift, surgical, and extremely public. I filed complaints with the Missouri State Licensing Board about demanded itemized breakdowns of every alleged improvement the fees were supposed to cover, and requested HOA budget transparency at their monthly meeting in front of 63 residents, who suddenly realized they'd been funding a personal vendetta. The smell of fresh coffee brewing during my late-night research sessions, mixed with the satisfaction of watching Cordelist's T-Plan develop its first major leak. A simple license verification, hey, just destroyed months of expensive legal. Sometimes the most effective weapons are the ones hiding in plain sight. Cordelia's reaction was predictably defensive and spectacular. She fired off passive-aggressive mails about harassment of professional staff and scheduled an emergency HOA board meeting, conveniently excluding non-residents like me from attendance. Because nothing says we're totally legitimate, like secret meetings and defensive tantrums worthy of a reality TV show. But the damage was done, and spreading like water through a cracked fund. Longtime residents like Dalton Greystone, a retired teacher who had lived here 30 years, started asking uncomfortable questions about why they were suddenly paying emergency assessments to fund legal battles they'd never voted on. Savannah Riverside, a widow on a fixed income, began showing up at my door with her own copies of suspicious HOA invoices, and a growing suspicion that she'd been played. That community was fracturing along predictable lines. Newer residents clutching their property value fierce like life preservers, while old-timers quietly wondered when their neighborhood association had transformed into something that would make organized crime families blush with embarrassment. The amateur hour corruption, anonymous, social media harassment ramped up with the sophistication of bullies armed with fake accounts. Someone was spreading rumors about veterans and unstable damned the digital equivalent of throwing spaghetti at a wall and praying for marinara sauce to stick. The sound of my boots on gravel as I walk a toe check my mailbox each morning had come a daily reminder that this was far from over. But now those footsteps carried the confidence of someone who just landed the first real blow in what was shaping up to be a very Cordelia's response to my licensing board complaint arrived faster than a tax audit on lottery winners. Apparently thing motivates HOA presidents. Quite like public embarrassment in front of people who actually pay their salary. Enter Pettin and Associates, the kind of aggressive real estate law firm that makes ambulance chasers look dignified by comparison. Their letterhead was thick enough to armor a tank, and their first certified letter hit my mailbox with all the subtlety of a freight train carrying bad news and overpriced legal. The new claim. My dam created catastrophic liability exposure for the HOA, and I needed professional liability insurance or immediate removal proceedings would commence. The letters smelled like expensive cologne and pure. Apparently, when your fake expert gets his license yanked, the next move is hiring real lawyers to make some fake arguments with fancier. But here's where my engineering background proved during my core days, I'd learned that the most dangerous opponent isn't one screaming threats. It's the one quietly building a better mousetrap. So, while Cordelia was carpet bombing my mailbox with legal intimidation, I was doing what engineers do best, systematic problem solving and meticulous. The pressure campaign escalated with the efficiency of a military operation. Daily certified letters arrived like clockwork, each on a routine up the language and compressing the deadlines. County inspectors began materializing at inconvenient hours, always responding to anonymous safety concerns that read like Cordelia's greatest hits album. The local newspaper received a concernedison letter about agging infrastructure dangers written in proso overwrought. It belonged in a soap opera script. Then while sorting through legal avalanche one evening, I discovered something that made my coffee taste bitter with irony. The sound of rustling documents had become my eventing soundtrack. But one invoice caught my attention like a fire alarm in out. Cordelia's legal fees weren't coming from her designer purse. They were being funded through emergency, including the very people she claimed to be protecting from my dangerous dam. My neighbor, Dalton Greystone, confirmed this scam when he peered at my door, clutching his assessment notice like evidence of war crimes. "Zeke," he said, his retired teacher's voice shaking with controlled fury. "I've been paying legal fees to destroy your family's dam. When exactly did we vote fund this woman's personal jihad?" The answer, of course, was never. Cordelia had been operating like a dictator with a homeowners association, using community funds to finance personal vendettas. In my military experience, We had a technical term for officers who abused their authority for personal gain, weckled them candidates for court-martial. My counterpunch involved strategic precision that would have Madame old commanding officer proud. I contacted Marlo Chen, an environmental law attorney who specialized in water rights and harbored a professional grudge against HOA overreach. I filed Freedom of Information Act requests for every county communication about my... Most importantly, I began documenting each HOA bylaw violation with the methodical thoroughness of Samayan, building a federal case. Because that's exactly what this was becoming. The legal discovery revealed what the HOA had never properly incorporated authority over pre-existing. Cordelia had been issuing orders with all the legal validity of a mall's security guard trying to arrest federal agents. Multiple board decisions validated Missouri Sunshine Lori, and her emergency assessments had about as much legitimacy as a $3 bill printed on toilet paper. From dealing with military bureaucracy, I'd learned that organizations questionable authority, absolute a hit, having their power challenged in well-lit public forums by people who've actually read the relevant laws. Community response was swift and deployed. Dalton started a Tandingaveri HOA meeting, armed with pointed questions about financial transparency. Savannah Riverside, that sweet widowhood, been quietly paying assessment she couldn't afford, began organizing her fixed-income residents, who'd suddenly realized they were bankrolling Zami and Elsa's power trip. Clandestine meetings convened in my kitchen, where the aroma of strong coffee mixed with quiet determination of people who'd finally recognized they'd been systematically conned. We called ourselves concerned residents, but we were really a support group for victims of HOA financial abuse. Cordelia Vesperian became obvious when she issued a 48-hour emergency abatement notice, claiming sudden dam inspection had revealed catastrophic structural deficiency requiring immediate. The timing was surgically precise, scheduled for Autumn's wedding week, when family obligations would say prevent me from interfering, but Cordelia had made one critical miscalculation about retired military. She assumed I'd choose my daughter's happiness over my family's 80-year legacy. She was about to discover that engineers don't just build structures to withstand it. We designed them to survive human ones, too. And I'd been planning for this particular storm since the day she first knocked on my door. The morning of Autumn's wedding dawned crisp and clear. The kind of perfect octobirdie that makes you believe the university occasionally gets its act together. I was adjusting my dress uniform in the mirror, thinking about walking my daughter down the same path where of Ironwoods had celebrated life's biggest moments, when the sound of EV machinery shattered the morning peace like a wrecking ball through a cathedral. 6A.M. Diesel engines roaring to life. The unmistakable hydraulic whine of excavators warming up for destruction. I stepped onto my porch, still buttoning me jacket, and saw them. A demolition crew positioned around my grandfather's dome like vultures at an all-you-can-eat. Cordelia stood nearby, in designer boots that had probably never seen honest dirt, clipboard in hand, directing the operation with the gleeful efficiency of someone who timed Thismamin for maximum emotion. Emergency safety order, she announced when she spotted me waving an official-looking document like a consistator's flag. Structure inspection revealed immediate We're protecting the community from your negligence. The crew had already positioned their equipment when I approached, my dress shoes crunching in gravel that would soon be mixed with 80 years of family history. The excavator operator looked about as comfortable as a vegetarian at a barbecue festival, probably because of destroying someone's heritage. While they are dressed for their daughter's wedding tends to make even hardened contractors question their career choices. I said, keeping my voice leveled, spite rage building like steam pressure in a boiler. I'm going to need to see that emergency order and time inspection report that triggered it. Cordelia's smile had all the warmth of a tax audit. The safety of this community takes precedence over your sentimental addictions, Mr. Ironwood. This structure is a liability we can no longer tolerate. That's when my engineering I caught something that made my blood pressure spike. Her emergency order had dates that didn't match reality. The inspection supposedly triggering this urgent demolition had been conducted 3 weeks ago, and the work permit she was brandishing like evidence was actually an expired county authorization from an unrelated drainer project, 6 months old. My counterpunches, immediate and public. Folks, I called out to the growing crowd of early Arving wedding guests. Y'all might want to document this. Mrs. Blackthorn's about to commit what appears to be destruction of private property using fraudulent paperwork during a family celebration. But Cordelia had made honest spectacular miscalculation in her. Today wasn't just my daughter's wedding. It was the day she'd invited 150 witnesses to watch her destroy my family's legacy, including retired Judge Clarence Whitfield and military chaplain Father Benedict Stone, both of whom understood the difference between legal authority and elaborate criminal. The first hydraulic claw Tinto limestone that had weathered 80 decades of Missouri storms, and the sound was like civilization itself breaking apart. Clear water that had flowed controlled and peaceful since 1943 suddenly rushed wild and unrestrained. carrying away topsoil and decades of careful erosion control like nature's own revenge. Within 2 hours, what had taken my grandfather months to build was reduced to rubble and muddy. The ceremony relocated to the church basement. Autumn's white dressum stained with creek mud, and 150 wedding guests transformed into very angry witnesses to what looked increasingly like premeditated vandalism disguised as municipal authority. The texture of my daughter's muddy dress, my fingers as I helped her navigate the chaos, felt like holding evidence of a war crime committed against my family's most sacred moment. But here's what Cordelia's arrogance hadn't anticipated. Midwestern wedding guests don't passively watch family heritage get bulldozed during celebrations. The entire guest list became instant advocates armed with smartphones, recording every moment of bureaucratic savory timed for maximum cruelty. Judge Whitfield cornered me during thorough-allocated reception, his weathered face grim with professional outrage. Zeke, that wasn't a legal demolition. Emergency orders require specific, and what I witnessed was either catastrophic incompetence or deliberate fraud with federal implications. Father Benedict offered something more valuable: connections to investigative Urschultz, who specialized in government overreach stories. Son Hesed straightening his collar with hands that had blessed soldiers heading into combat. Sometimes evil hides behind paperwork and procedure, but truth has a way of surfacing, like water finding cracks in stone. The immediate consequences were swift and deeply poetic. Uncontrolled water flow began flooding HOA common areas within hours, turning their pristine walking trails into muddy disasters that resembled the aftermath of Local news picked up Thruding Day demolition story by evening, complete with video footage of Cordelia directing destruction while formalidrist guests watched in horror. Social media exploded with Ash Justice 4's hashtags and darkly humorous commentary about HOA President who apparently objected to happiness occurring near fun. Several board members slightly developed amnesia about supporting Cordelia's increasingly and Hingley leadership style, but the real Gamecker was hiding among the wedding debris. As we cleaned up the next morning, wind-blown documents from theft flooding had scattered across including water-damaged HOA financial records that had literally blown from Cordelia's yard during that house her own destruction had unleashed. Those soggy papers contained secrets that would transform this personal vendetta into a federal criminal case. Cordelia had just handed me the ammunition to destroy her completely, gift wrapped in the consequences of her own cruelty. The smell of diesel exhaust still hung in the morning air, as eyes moved out documents that would redirect the flow of justice exactly where it needed to go. The water damage documents scattered across my yard looked like confetti from Hell's Own victory party. But as I smoothed out the soggy papers on my kitchen table, the smoke surfaced where 3 generations of Ironwoods had solved family problems. I realized Cordelia's flood had delivered something more valuable than it had delivered a confession written in her own handwriting. HOA financial records, literally blown from her yard during the chaos, told a story that made her damn obsession sudden like crystal clear. The musty smell of wet paper mixed with the bitter aroma of my morning coffee as I processed what I was seeing. This wasn't about safety, liability, or community standards. This was about covering up theft that would make Bernie Madoff blush with professional admiration. The first document stopped me cold. A bank statement showing the HOA's actual balance negative, $847,847,000 in debt from a beautification project that had somehow transformed Vinnie Borhood budget into a financial black hole, deeper than Cordelia's more. But that number was just the warm-up act for the main event. Invoice after invoice revealed payments to Blackthorn Landscaping Solutions, a company that existed only in Cordelia's Agonation and bank account. $200,000 for landscaping work that had never been performed, maintenance that had never happened, and consulting fees for expertise that apparently consisted of advanced embezzlement techniques and creative accounting worthy of organized crime. The timeline hit me like cold water in the face. Cordelia had been systematically draining community funds for 2 years using shell companies and fake invoices with all the subtlety of a bank robbery staged during a marching band parade. When residents started questioning rising assessments and declining services, she needed a distraction spectacular enough to justify emergency expenditures and insurance claims. Enter my grandfather's dom, not as a safety hazard, but as a financial scapegoat. The insurance side correspondent made my engineer's brain hurt with its sheer audacity. Email chains between Cordelia and an adjuster list how catastrophic upstream infrastructure failure could trigger massive coverage for flood damage to common areas. The plan was elegantly simple and thoroughly criminal. Destroy me dam, blame the resulting chaos on failed pre-existing infrastructure, and use insurance payouts to replace stolen money, while painting me as the negligent property owner who'd endangered the entire community. My family's 80-year legacy had become the sigh for her 2-year crime spree, but desperation had made Cordelia sloppy in ways that would make career criminals weep with him. Email timestamps showed she'd been planning insurance fraud before the dam destruction, complete with pre-staged photographs of pre-existing damage to areas that would conveniently flood when my creek ran. From my military experience with supply chain corruption, I recognize it as level of financial manipulation rook, either spectacular, stupidity, or pathological confidence in personnel invincible. Cordelia had apparently embraced both philosophies with the enthusiasm of who'd never heard of federal priest. The smoking gun was buried in a folder marked emergency reserves, bank transfer records showing HOA funds flowing to offshore accounts in the Cayman Islands. Because nothing safe, neighborhood association, like money laundering operations that would impress cartel accountants. Marlo Chen's assessment the next morning was swift and professionally devastating. Zeke, she said, spreading the evidence across her conference table like evidence from a federal task force. This isn't simple embezzlement. We're looking at wire fraud, mail fraud, insurance fraud, conspiracy, and money laundering. Federal prosecutors will be fighting over who gets to try this case. The war dynamic had just executed a complete reversal that would have impressed military strategists. I was undefending my property against HOA Reach. I was sitting on evidence that would send their president to federal prison for decades, while they're covering every stolen penny plus punitive damages that would bankrupt her into the next geological era. But Timming will determine whether we caught a thief or just scared away a flight risk. Exposing Cordelia immediately might trigger evidence destruction or an express flight to non-extradition. The smart play involved with letting her continue digging while federal authorities built an escape-proof case. Judge Whitfield's federal connections proved invaluable for coordinating the investigation without alerting our target. Son, he said, reviewing evidence with clinical precision, honed by decades of judicial. This woman has committed enough federal crimes to keep her secutors busy until retirement. But we need to catch her actively moving money, not just holding proof of historical theft. The irony was malicious enough to serve at Cordelia had destroyed my family's heritage to cover up stealing from the very neighbors she'd convinced he'd fund her legal war against me. Those same people would soon have front row seats to watching their trusted leader get arrested for robbing them methodically and creatively. Father Benedict captured the moment perfectly during our next kitchen. Evil has a tendency to consume. Zeke, our responsibility is ensuring the community gets an unobstructed view of the consequences. My kitchen table had transformed into a war room that would have impressed Pentagon strategists, covered with evidence folders, legal documents, and now coffee cups to caffeinate a small me. The smell of fresh brewing mixed with the satisfaction of watching a plan come together with the precision of Swiss clockwork operated by the team assembled around that oak table represented everything Cordelia had catastrophical diced about small-town networks and military precision planning. Marla Chen brought environmental law expertise into personal vendetta against corruption that burned hotter than asphalt in August. Judge Clarence Whitfield contributed federal connections and for decades of legal strategy refined by watching criminal thought they were smarter than the Constitution. Father Benedict offered community organizing skills and the kind-off moral authority that makes people confess sins they'd forgotten. Our resident intelligence at work consisted of some impressive limited neighbors. Dalton Greystone had access to HOA meeting minutes and the observational skills of someone who'd survived 30 years of middle school politics. Savannah Riverside tracked financial irregularities with spreadsheet precision that would make heiress auditors weep with professional envy. Preston Ashworth, the former board member who'd quit in disgust, had kept copies of everything because he'd seen this disaster coming from 3 fiscal years away. Marlowe mapped out our legal strategy like a general planning DID, but with better coffee and significantly a righteous anger. We document every HOA bylaw violation while preparing criminal referrals for embezzlement, and civil suits for property destruction would run parallel tokalenges against the HOA's fundamental authority over pre-existing properties. From my core days, I remembered that effective attacks hit multiple targets. When you're flanked from 6 directions, everything Judge Whitfield's forensic accounting contact agreed to audit HOA books with the enthusiasm of someone who specialized in finding money hidden by people who thought they were clever than mathematics. His FBI connection would investigate insurance fraud with federal resources and subpoena. Power thought could pierce corporate veils like tissue paper. We'd request asset for Zesto, prevent further theft while preparing resid class action suits for those illegal assessments that had funded Cordelia's personal legal war. Father Benedict's investigative journalist and tax practically salivated over theft, bureaucratic corruption, veteran family targeted, community funds stolen, wedding day destruction. The media package wrote itself, small town David versus Goliath. Except Goliath was embezzling money, and David had federal law enforcement backing his slingshot. Meanwhile, our neighborhood intelligence at work operated with efficiency that would have impressed CIA handlers. Dalton's daily dog walks convenient listed Cordelia's house, documenting specious contractor visits and luxury purchases that seemed remarkably in contest with her claims of financial difficulties. The man called identify irregular spending patterns from 3 blocks away, which was either impressive investigative instinct or the natural result of decades spent managing shul budgets. Savannah tracked every assessment notice and expenditure, with spreadsheet precision that revealed patterns invisible to casual. Preston photograph a Devance, being removed from HOA, a fistering routine maintenance that looked suspiciously like systematic, document obstruction performed by people who'd never heard of obstruction of justice. We organized like a neighborhood watch program crossed with a federal task. Force sharing intelligence through encrypted group texts and weekly coffee meetings. Fate appeared completely innocent to outside. The beauty of small-town operations. Nobody suspects the church ladies and retired teachers of conducting sophistic financial investigations. Father Benedict's community healing meetings provided legal education dished as pastoral care, teaching residents about property rights and whole limitations they'd never realized they possessed. Judge Whitfield explained how financial mismanagement laws applied to volunteer board members who'd assumed their authority was unlimited. I led volunteer flood cleanup efforts, building goodwill while documenting damage from Cordelis Destructi with photographic evidence thought would survive federal court scrutiny. The community response exceeded our most optimistic. People who'd been afraid to question authority discovered courage in numbers, and residents who'd felt isolated realized they weren't alone in their suspicions about HOA. Nothing builds solidarity quite like discovering you've all been systematically conned by the same person. Cordelia's reaction to our methodical approach was predictable prane and spectacular kukrinter. Security cameras sprouted around her property like technological mushrooms after rain. She stopped attending public meetings, sending proxies with talking points that sounded increasingly desp and legally problematic. Bank records showed asset transfers to shore accounts accelerating. Exactly what federal investigators needed to document active money laundering and real. My property became the secure document storage facility, organized with military precision that would have a maid supply sergeants proud. Digital copies lived at Marlowe's law firm, under attorney-client privilege. Physical evidence went into Judge Whitfield personal safe with chain of custody documentation that could satisfy Supreme Court evidence requirements. Every document was photographed, every transaction traced, every communication wrecked with legal precision that transformed amateur hour neighborhood courtry into federal felony charges backed by evidence that could serve a VPLET review. The sound of my printer humming late into the night became the soundtrack of justice being methodically expended, one damning document at a time. From military logistics experience, I knew the critical details that would seal this case. HOA board members faced personal liability for financial mismanagement. Information that would motivate cooperation when federal investigators started asking pointed questions. Property destruction required both criminal prosecution and civil recovery to ensure complete insurance fraud carried tenure. Federal sentences that made plea bargaining very attractive for anyone smart enough to realize their position was hopeless. Our preparation was reaching critical mass with federal authorities coordinating arrest timing while we maintained community education and evidence preservation. Cordelia had an idea that every day she delayed surrender was another day of evidence accumulation that would make her eventual sentence exponentially worse. The creek kept flowing over the Rubeloff. My grandfather's dam, carrying the promise that justice flows toward Thasuhu. Forget that water always finds the lowest point. And in this case, there was going to be a federal courthouse with uncomfortable seating. Cordelia's history that her missing had blown straight into Inimahan's triggered a meltdown that transformed months of calculatorist into weeks of incursinglitist criminal activity. Her first move proved that panic destroys judgment faster than water erodes as limestone. She broke into my property at 2 o'clock in Themernon, searching for documents that were already safely locked away. My trail cameras captured every moment of her amateur burglary attempt, including 5 minutes she spent cursing at my garden hose after tripping over it, like some kind of vengeful yoga instructor. The footage was simultaneously hilarious and disturbing. Cordelia, in Designareth lizard gear, wielding a flashlight while attempting stealth operations that would have embarrassed drunk teenagers, but watching someone desperate enough to commit felonies on camera tends to kill comedy pretty quickly. Her sabotage campaign escalated with all the subtle tie-off a marching band practicing in social media posts appeared. My mental stability, and spreading rumors about dangerous, veteran behavior that read like they'd been written by someone whose anti-Renelja military service came from action movies and political attack ads. The harassment crossed every limit society pretends exists. Anonymous complaints to the VAC questioning my disability, benefits. False reports to child services claiming gun-safe environment for grandchildren visited maybe twice a month. She even attempted to challenge Autumn's murder, claiming fraudulent venue. The ceremony had been relocated due to her own destructive actions. but Cordelia's desperation produced one gif that perfectly illustrated how panic makes smart people do impossible stupid things. She hired a private investigator to find dirt on our coalition members, someone named Roland Grimm, who asked very professional questions about our conspiracy against community leadership. What Cordelia didn't realize was that Roland Grimm was FBI agent Roland Grimm, already investigating HOA financial crimes. Wenched essentially paid federal law enforcement to strengthen their case against her. Sometimes irony is so perfect it feels like divine intervention with a sense of humor. My counterpunch involved the kind of methodical documentation that drives despotate criminals toward increasingly close behavior. Every harassment it was recorded, photographed, and filed with appropriate authorities. Trail cam footage of her breaking and entering went to local police and federal investigators. Her social media errands were preserved like evidence in a museum dedicated to self-incrimination. The community response was swift and decisive. Residents who'd been our troublemaking suddenly willing to break neighbors' homes and file false reports against veterans might not or present ideal community leadership. Several HOA board members resignated than risk legal exposure for enabling escalating criminal behavior. Local news coverage was less flattering than Cordelia had probably anticipated. She'd first courted me to HOA president's public breakdown made for complete with security footage and social media showing Hattard painted an unflattering portrait of suburban authority gone completely off the rails. The bribery attempt happened at Murphy's coffee shop on Main Street, where Cordelia arrived with the desperate confidence of someone who'd confused criminal conspiracy with business negotiation. "Mr. Ironwood," she said, sliding an envelope across the scarred wooden table like we were conducting some kind of spy movie transaction, "I believe we can resolve this on $500,000. For those documents, and we can all move forward from this regrettable situation." The smell of fresh coffee, mixed with her expensive perfume, and the of pure desperation as she offered Hopper's evidence of her own crimes with money that almost certainly belonged to the neighbors she'd been systematically robbing. What made the moment particularly satisfying was their recording device Agent Grimm had suggested I carry, because apparently derek criminals often provide better evidence than trained investigators. Through months of surveillance, the quality of her recorded confession have impressed federal prosecutors who specialized in financial crime cases. Agent Grimm later told me that Cordelia had inadvertently committed 3 additional federal crimes during her 15-minute coffee meeting, including bribery, attempted obstruction of justice, and conspiracy to commit evidence tampering. Professional criminals spend years learning to avoid sufficient self-incrimination. Cordelia's final desperate gambit involved liquidating remaining HOA funds while planning to flee the country by arrest. She'd booked flights, donations without extradition treaties, transferred assets to accounts already under federal surveillance, and scheduled one last emergency board meeting to transfer authority to her hand-picked successor. Agent Grimm's 7ing updates became our day. Cordelia was essentially fling a criminal activity checklist by law enforcement to mock a federal prosecutions easier, while apparently believing she was executing some kind of brilliant escape strategy. It would confuse investigators who'd been tracking financial crimes since she discovered offshore banking. The sound of my phone buzzing with intelligence updates had become as regular as evening news broadcasts, except significantly more entertaining and featuring much better character development. Each desperate move was another piece of evidence in what was becoming a federal prosecutor's dream case. The texture of growing evidence files under my hands felt like watching compound interest accumulate, while Cordelia's desperation, excellent Edward, the kind of public confrontation thought, would make her wedding day destruction look like a minor etiquette. Water keeps flowing downhill, carrying debris toward and Cordelia was rushing toward consequences she'd spent months trying to avoid, but was now approaching with the efficiency of someone who'd mistaken frantic activity for the creek still ran wild, where my grandfather's careful engineering once controlled its flow, but soon, it would carry something more valuable than water, toward justice. It would carry the truth about what happens when petty authority meets feet. Cordelia's last stand began with a propaganda campaign that combined the subtlety of a car alarm with the accuracy of a blind professional flyer sappered throughout the neighborhood, featuring stock photos of concerned families and headlines screaming, "Protect our community from violent extremists." The messaging was almost artistic in its complete separation from According to Cordelia's altered universe, I was leading a dangerous militia group of radicalizators and disgruntled residents who posed an immediate threat to family safety and property values. The flyers shred like they'd been written by Munoz. Primary sources were dystopian novels and late-night cable news pen. She'd organized an emergency community safety meeting with all the theatrical production value of a ton. Political rally crossed with a particularly dramatic episode of dating. The venue was our flu-damaged community center because nothing's credible leadership like holding meetings in buildings damaged by your own destructive decisions. Her hybrid security consisted of off-duty police officers who looked professional in a funtal. You realized they were unwingly proving muscle for someone about to-star in a federal per walk. These guys probably thought they were protecting a concerned citizen from angry neighbors, not enabling the final act of a financial crime spree that would have embarrassed organized criminals. The social media blitz, fear, bot networks spreading fear about property seizure by and veteran mental health crisis threaten neighborhood. Children. Someone was investing serious money in digital manipulation that might have been effective if our community's idea of social media warfare and more advanced than Argangabot school fundraiser logistics on Facebook. But Cordelia's final deception was her criminal masterpiece. Every dollar she transferred to her escape fund was flowing directly into an FBI sting operation so convincing she was paying federal law enforcement overtime to document her money laundering in high definition. Agent Grimm had created a shell corporation so professionally Cordelia was voluntarily funding her own prosecution with the enthusiasm of someone donating to charity. The technical beauty was mesmerizing. Each transaction triggered automatic federal documentation. Every communication was preserved for and her brilliant escape strategy was being live-streamed to prosecutors who were probably using ETA's educational material for future cases involving them spectacular lists of incriminating defendants. Meanwhile, our coalition's preparation pressed with the quiet efficiency of people who'd learned that the best revenge is competently executed justice. FBI agents positioned themselves at the community, disguised as concerned residents who'd coincidentally it to attend a neighborhood meeting while carrying federal arrest warrants, and probably wondering if all small-town criminals were this cooperative. Local media crews had been briefed, but agreed to maintain silence until the appropriate moment, because nothing improves television ratings quite like live footage of someone being arrested immediately after publicly denying thigh crimes they're about to be charged with. Judge Whitfield ensured legal observers will document proper procedure. Father Benedict organized what he diplomatically termed a prayer circle for community healing, but which functionally served as a peaceful witness network designed to prevent any future claims of intimidation or procedural violations. Marlo Chen filed final court documents for immediate recovery and full community. The irony was so concentrated, it could have been bottled and sold as a premium product. Cordelia had scheduled her propaganda performance sign, a building damaged by flooding she'd funded by money she'd stolen. While addressing residents she'd systematically deceived. Surrounded by federal agents she'd accidentally hired to investigate her crimes. Her arrival was choreographed with dramatic flair, usually reserved for political campaigns or particularly ambitious She emerged from a rented Bentley, almost certainly financed with embezzled community funds, wearing an outfit that projected authority she'd never legally possessed, and confidence if it would have been inspiring if it hadn't been so completely misplaced. Deprivate security detail look at impressively professional until you considered they were essentially escorting their client to her own arrest. These officers had no idea they were providing protective service for someone whose evening plans include federal custody and a very uncomfortable contours about constitutionalists. Cordelia's prepared speech focused on protecting community while investing from dangerous elements and maintaining property values against extremist threats. She planned to deliver this performance while standing in a stage surrounded by water damage caused by her own vandalism, denouncing people whose money she'd stolen, while federal agents she'd unknowingly funded took notes for her criminal trial. Agent Grimm later revealed that Cordelia had spent the morning finalizing arrangements to flee the country immediately after the meeting, apparently believing she called her straight one final public relations victory before retiring to a beach somewhere. With weak extradition policy and strong banking privacy laws, her optimism was either deeply inspiring or profoundly disturbing, depending on your perspective regarding criminal community division was visible. As residents entered the newer homeowners clutched propaganda materials, genuinely concerned about safety issues they didn't understand. Long-term residents carried photographs of flood damage and copies of suspicious assessment notices, printing years of accumulate frustration. Finally, children's drawings of my grandfather's dam still decorated through artwork created during school visits before Cordelia's destruction, showing clear water flowing peaceful through limestone channels that no longer existed. The contrast, reminiscent memories, and present chaos proved visual testimony to what her community improvement efforts had actually accomplished. The smell of mildew from uncontrolled flooding mixed nervous anticipation as people filled folding chairs, arranged for what will become a live demonstration of how federal justice handles small-town financial crimes. Sometimes the universe provides entertainment so perfectly scripted it feels like divine comedy written by someone with access to surveillance footage and a particularly dark sense of humor. The Willowbrook Community Center had never hosted anything quite like Cordelia's final performance. 200 residents packed into a space that smelled like mildew and broken dreams. while camera crews positioned equipment with the practice of people who specialized in documenting spectacular public failures. Cordelia made her entrance with the confidence of someone who'd confused illusion with strategy, flanked by security guards who looked increasingly inclined as they noticed the unusual number of concerned residents wearing suits and speaking interconsole microphones. Her designer outfit projected authority she'd never possessed, funded by money she'd never earned, for a community she'd systematically betrayed. The PowerPoint presentation was a masterpiece of rejection and misdirection. Slide after slide depicted dangerous veterans and property value threats while compulsively ignoring the water stains covering thralls around her. Visual evidence of theft and her own actions had caused. Cha spoke about financial responsibility while federal agents she'd unknowingly hired sat in the audience taking notes on crimes she was about to confess to on live television. Ladies and gentlemen, Cordelia began, her voice carrying the practiced authority of someone who'd spent years convincing people that theft was community improvement. We face an unprecedented threat to our neighborhood's safety and investment security. Extremist elements have infiltrated our community, spreading dangerously say about our financial management while the very foundations of property value protection. The audience reaction split along predictable lines. Newer residents clutched their propaganda flyers, nodding along with rhetoric that painted their neighbors as domestic terrorists. Long-term residents sat quietly, many holding photographs of flood damage and copies of the assessment notices that had funded this elaborate charade. My coalition occupied front row with the calm confidence of people who'd spent weeks preparing for this moment. Dalton, Savannah, and Preston sat like poker players holding royal flushes, waiting for the right men to reveal their cards. Judge Whitfield observed from the side, taking notes with the methodic, documented Javins for future legal proceedings. Cordelia's fatal mistake came 20 minutes Licento presentation whenever transformed careful Licento brazen admissions. I personally authorized the removal of that danger-ousdom structure, she declared, gesturing dramatically towards slides, showing my because community safety takes precedence over sentimental attachments to outdated infrastructure. The admission of destruction of private property was recorded by multiplex cameras and witnessed by 200 residents, but Cordelia was just getting started with her self-incrimination tour. HOA exercises full authority over all neighborhood properties, she continued, apparently forgetting that half her audience consisted of people whose property predated her organization and we will take whatever legal action necessary to protect our community from troublemakers who spread lies about our financial management. That's when I stood up, approaching the microphone with the unhurried pace of Samayan, who'd been waiting months for this exact moment. Mrs. Blackthorne, I said, my voice carrying clearly through the damaged room. Thank you for confessing to destruction of private property on camera and in front of 200 witnesses. Now, let's talk about something really interesting, like the $847,000 in HOA debt you've been hiding from these residents. The silence that followed was so complete you could have heard a pin drop in the next county. And the $200,000 you've stolen from your neighbor's pockets through fake invoices to shell companies you control, I continued, pulling out the water damage documents that had started this entire investigation. Should we discuss that on camera, or would you prefer to wait for federal agents to redo your... Cordelia's face went through ocular transition that would have impressed chameleons as the implication shit her like a freight train carrying federal arrest warrants. Those are lies, she screamed, abandoning all pretense after... Stop spreading security, remove this. But her security detail had noticed something she'd missed. The unusually large number of residents displaying federal badges and looking very interested in her response to accusations of financial crimes. Agent Grimm stepped forward with the casual confidence of someone who'd been waiting all evening for his cue. Mrs. Cordelia Blackthorne, you're under arrest for wire fraud, mail fraud, money laundering, and conspiracy to commit insurance fraud. The sound of handcuffs clicking closed echoed through sudden silence like the final note of a very expensive symphony. Cordelia stands to stop this conspiracy and protests about veteran extremists were drowned out by the Miranda warning Beingrad in the patient voice of someone would. Performed this procedure many times before. The community's reaction was immediate and deeply satisfying. Spontaneous applause erupted from residents who'd finally watched Justice Irv with handcuffs and federal badge. Tears flowed from elderly neighbors who'd watched their savings disappear into Cordelia's Children asked parents why the mean lady was crying while police officers explained constitutional rights. Local news cameras captured the moment as Cordelia was escorted from the building. She damaged past residents she'd stolen from toward a federal courthouse where financial crimes were treated with the seriousness they deserved. The live stream went viral within minutes with hashtags trending that would have embarrassed a Danian with functioning shame receptors. National media picked up the story. By HOA president arrested daring community meeting for massive imbecile scheme complete with of someone being arrested immediately after publicly denying She was charged with committing the remaining HOA board, dissolved faster than sugar and rain. Unwilling to risk association with federal criminal community members voted unanimously to create a resident-controlled neighborhood association based on transparency, accountability, and the revolutionary concept that stealing from your neighbors was morally and legally problematic. Agent Grimlator told me that Cordelia had managed commit 3 additional federal crimes during her final speech, including perjury, obstruction of justice, and making false statements to federal officers who'd identified Fensvalls before the meeting began. The crick outside still ran wild, where my grandfather's engineering unson controlled its flow. But inside that damaged building, justice had finally found its proper course towards someone who'd forgotten that water always seeks the lowest point, and federal courtrooms tend to be very low indeed. Justice moved swiftly once federal prosecutor shot Cordelia's recorded confessions, documented money transfers, and enough evidence to fill a small library dedicated to creative financial crimes. She pled guilty to avoid a 15-year sentence that would have made her eligible for Social Security upon receiving 5 years in federal prison, complete asset forfeit, and a restitution order that would follow her like a particularly persistent creditor for the rest of her natural life. The $2.1 million recovery exceeded even our most optimistic projections. Apparently, Cordelia had been more thorough in her theft than anyone realized, including sure accounts that federal investigators traced with the enthusiasm of treasure hunters armed with every stolen dollar returned to the community, plus punitive damage asset, transformed our neighborhood Ososhancha from bankrupt to better than most small-town governments. My personal settlement for proper destruction and emotional damages, Comito, $500,000, which felt less like compensation and more like cosmic irony with a very expensive price, but money couldn't rebuild 80 years of family heritage. That would require something more valuable than cash. Theodem restoration became a community project that would have made my grandfather proud, combining his original limestone with modern engineering that included fish, ladders, walking trails, and educational neighborhoods from the kind of flooding that had damaged our community. Volunteer labor from neighbors shred us costs while building relationships that turned former strangers into something resembling an actual community. Autumn and her husband moved into the renovated farmhouse that spring, making me a grandfather to children who would learn to fish in waters their great-great-grandfather had controlled with hand-cut stone. And patient engineering. The sound of young voices echoing across water that flowed clean and controlled felt like the best possible ending to a story that had started with destruction and spite. The Willowbrook Neighbors Association repulsed the HOA with democratic voting, transparent budgets, and monthly that actually brought people instead of driving them apart. Property values increased when potential buyers realized they could purchase in a community run by residents instead of aspiring dictators. With access to legal fees and offshore banking, we established the Ironwood Veterans Foundation for PTSD, Cordelia's restitution payments, to provide services for military with the kind of bureaucratic arrests that had nearly the irony of using her stolen money to help veterans. She'd tried to demonize felt like justice with a sense of humor that appreciated law. The Willowbrook Environmental Education Center, opened near the restored dam, where local schools bring children to learn about water management, community cooperation, and financial transparency matters in democratic institutions. Teacher-led field trips include hands-on lessons about engineering, environment, and how ordinary citizens can fight corruption when they work together with proper documentation and federal assistance. Our annual Freedom from HOA Festival celebrates community independence with food trucks, live music, and educational booths about legal rights that most homeowners never realize they possess. Local attorneys provide free consultations about association bylaws, state oversight warrants, and when HOA authority crosses into criminal territory that requires federal attention. The Scholarship Fund helps young veterans pursue education in engineering, law, and public administration, fields where understanding how systems work prevents the kind of abuse that Cordelia had practiced with such spectacular criminal creation. Recipients learn that Thebes' defense against corruption is citizens who understand their rights and aren't afraid to document violations with legal precision. Father Benedict's community organizing efforts spread by in our neighborhood, helping other subdivisions identify financial irregularities and challenge illegal. His network of pastoral care meetings provided cover for legal that transformed confusimmuners into informed citizens capable of asking uncomfortable about budget, transparency, and fiduciary responsibility. Judge Whitfield became our unofficial teaching residents about Sungshin laws, financial oversight, and how to request second of documentation that makes embezzlement difficult to hide from federal investigators. His monthly workshops attracted audiences from surrounding counties who'd heard about her successful resistance to HOA overreach. Marlo Chen established Shedders as the region's leading expert in community legal rights, representing her harbs across Missouri in case involving financial mismanagement, illegal assessments, and unauthorized drippery destruction. Her success rate attracted national attention to legal strategies that had transformed our local victory into a template for fighting suburban corruption. The replete fix exceeded anything weighed anticipated when this started as a fight to save one family's dam. Missarella Gessler passed HOA reform requiring and financial audits, sunshine law compliance, and criminal background checks for board members. Other states began investigating their own association oversight requirements. After seeing how easily financial crime scowled hide behind community improvement, the FBI created a task force specifically for HOA financial crimes, using our case as a training example for investigators who'd previously disputes as civil matters rather than potential federal crimes involving wire fraud, money laundering, and conspiracy charges that carried serious prison sentences. The finale scene played out exactly where it should, live at the restored dam, where 4 generations of my family had celebrated life's important moments. Autumn's first renewal ceremony brought together everyone who'd helped transform personal vindication into community healing with clear water flowing over new limestone that incorporated stones from my grandfather's original engineering judge. Whitfield performed the remodel ceremony while Father Benedict blessed that flowed controlled and purposeful toward neighborhoods protected by proper engineering and transparent governance. Children who drawn pictures of the destroyed dam now along banks were merged with family legacy in ways that felt like the future man had envisioned when he'd first placed stone upon stone with patient precision. Sometimes the best revenge isn't getting even. It's building something better than what they tried to destroy. Standing up to bullies doesn't just save your own property when you do it right. It saves entire communities from people who mistake authority for permission to steal from their neighbors. Share your own horror story in the comments. You might help someone else fighting similar battles against financial corrupt, but ordinary people defeating corrupt systems. Because justice isn't just for lawyers and politicians. It's for anyone willing to document evidence and demand accountability from people who've confused elected positions with criminal opportunities. Next week, the city council that Trudeau sees a family farm for a shopping mall development, and how one stubborn farmer used a 200-year-old property lot to turn eminent domain proceedings into a federal investigation of municipal corruption that reached all the way to the state capitol. The creek flows clear over restored stone, carrying promises that water always finds its proper course when good people refuse to let corruption dam the flow of justice toward where it belongs.